It's roughly 170,000 years ago. You're technically human, though you'd barely recognize yourself as one. You wake up on the African savanna, stretch, look around, and at no point does the thought, "I should really put on some pants," cross your mind. And yet, here we are today, billions of people every single morning getting dressed, some of us calling 3-day-old pajamas loungewear because it sounds more intentional. Clothing is so deeply woven into human life that we actually have laws about it. Society will step in if you're not wearing enough. Think about that for a second. An entire legal framework built around the basic idea of please cover up. No other species does this. Dogs don't wear clothes. Wolves don't wear clothes. Elephants, genuinely intelligent animals, have never once looked at a cold morning and thought, "I need a coat." So when did this actually start? And why did humans do something no other animal bothered with? The honest answer is, we don't know the exact date, but the trail that leads us there is strange, unexpected, and, fair warning, involves lice. Stick with it, because it's one of the strangest pieces of detective work in all of science. Let's start with a basic biological oddity nobody really talks about. Humans are almost the only large mammal on Earth that's nearly hairless. Gorillas, covered. Chimpanzees, covered. Bears, wolves, horses, elephants, full coats, every one of them, across wildly different climates. And then there's us. Smooth, patchy, oddly pink in places, looking like a species that used to have fur and simply gave it up. Scientists have a leading theory for why. As our ancestors moved from forests into open grassland and began running long distances to hunt, thick fur became a serious liability, overheating, slowing down, collapsing before catching prey. So over time, we shed the fur and gained something remarkable instead. An enormous number of sweat glands, somewhere between 2 and 4 million per person. We are, without exaggeration, some of the most efficient cooling systems in the animal kingdom. Great in the heat, considerably less great at -40 degrees in Central Asia, with nothing but sharp rocks and determination. And that's roughly where clothing enters the story, though maybe not for the reason you'd expect. The obvious explanation goes like this. Humans left Africa, hit cold climates, wrapped themselves in animal hide, problem solved. Clean, simple, logical. Except the timeline doesn't actually line up. Genetic evidence, which we'll get to shortly, suggests humans began wearing clothing somewhere between 100,000 and 170,000 years ago. But modern humans didn't migrate out of Africa in real numbers until roughly 70,000 years ago. So clothing shows up tens of thousands of years before anyone actually reached a cold climate. Something else was going on first, something social. Before we get to what clothing was actually for, we need to talk about the strangest piece of evidence in this entire story. Lice. Yes, we're doing this. Researchers at the University of Florida were studying the genetic history of human lice. The kind of painstaking work that occasionally produces a genuinely surprising discovery. Here's the key biological fact you need to know. Humans carry 2 distinct types of lice. Head lice, which live in your hair, and body lice, which live specifically in clothing. In the seams, the folds, the fabric. These are genetically separate populations, and body lice evolved from head lice at some identifiable point in history. Here's why that matters so much. Body lice can only survive if clothing exists for them to live in. They cannot survive on bare skin. They need fabric, warmth, and shelter that only clothing provides. So, the moment body lice genetically split off from head lice is essentially the moment humans started wearing clothes consistently enough to create an entirely new habitat for a parasite. When researchers ran the genetic analysis, they found that split happened somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. Think about that for a second. A parasite, one of the most universally disliked creatures in human history, accidentally preserved the earliest evidence of human clothing. The lice knew we got dressed before we did. So, what was clothing actually for first? Since we've established it predates the migration out of Africa, warmth can't be the original driver. Theory 1. Basic physical protection. Not from cold, but from sun, insects, thorny plants, and general abrasion. A simple wrap made from hide creates a real barrier between skin and things that scratch or bite. Not glamorous, but genuinely useful, and it likely reduced infection from small wounds. Theory 2 is where it gets genuinely interesting. Social signaling. Humans are deeply social animals, constantly communicating status, group identity, and intention. Through posture, expression, voice, and quite possibly, very early on, through what we wrapped around our bodies. There's evidence that our ancestors were using ochre pigment for body decoration as far back as 200,000 years ago, even earlier than the clothing evidence from lice, which means the impulse to decorate the body for visual signaling may actually be older than clothing itself. We were painting ourselves before we were dressing ourselves, and once you're already thinking about decorating skin, the leap to wearing a specific hide, worn a specific way, isn't far at all. Which hide? Whose kill was it? What does wearing it say about you? That's the beginning of the very first fashion system. For most of early human history, clothing was rough. A hide draped over the shoulders, held with a twisted cord, crudely cut with a stone flake. Functional, but nothing more. Then, around 50,000 years ago, something shifts in the archaeological record. Researchers start finding bone needles, not just tools for punching holes, but actual needles with tiny eyes bored through them, clearly designed for threading fiber and stitching material together with real precision. Fitted clothing, sewn seams, garments shaped to the body instead of just thrown over it. The oldest confirmed needle with a proper eye was found in Denisova Cave in Siberia, dating back roughly 50,000 years. It was carved from a hollow bird bone, polished to a fineness that's genuinely impressive. Someone looked at a sliver of bone, imagined a tool that didn't exist yet, figured out how to bore a clean hole through the narrow end without splitting it, and used it to join two pieces of material with a controlled, repeatable stitch. That's not just survival instinct. That's engineering. That's design thinking. And that needle matters more than almost any other object from that era. Because in Siberia, during a glacial winter, without properly fitted clothing sealing warmth against the body, survival simply wasn't possible. Neanderthals were doing this too, and doing it before they ever encountered modern humans. There's substantial evidence of Neanderthals processing animal hides, scraping bones in patterns consistent with hide preparation, using tools specifically shaped for working leather. There's also anatomical evidence that Neanderthals had cold-adapted bodies, stockier builds, shorter limbs, different fat distribution, suggesting they dealt with serious cold for a very long time. Clothing would have been essential, not optional. Then there are the Denisovans, a mysterious human lineage we only discovered in 2010 from a single finger bone found in that same Siberian cave. In the same layers as the needle, researchers found pierced and polished ornaments suggesting symbolic thinking and possibly garment decoration. A people we barely know existed were already thinking about how they looked, which raises a genuinely strange question. Is clothing something specifically human? Or is it what any sufficiently intelligent, cold, social creature eventually arrives at? We don't fully know. But the pattern across multiple human species is hard to dismiss. Here's the truly strange part of this whole story. If clothing were purely practical, every culture would have converged on the single most efficient solution for their climate and simply stopped there. That's not what happened. Instead, humans immediately made clothing mean something. Priests wore different things than warriors. Rulers wore garments no one else was allowed to wear. The dead were buried in specific clothing suited to their status. Some of the oldest textile fragments ever discovered weren't just plain fabric. They were dyed in multiple colors. Someone, tens of thousands of years ago, looked at a perfectly functional piece of cloth and decided it needed to be a different color. Not for warmth, but because it meant something. This is the fundamental strangeness of human clothing. We use it as language. We use it to build and broadcast identity. To say, I belong to this group. I hold this rank. I am mourning. I am celebrating. I am sacred. I am ordinary. No other animal does this. Peacocks display. Cuttlefish change color. But neither is choosing what to communicate based on social context or personal history. That's entirely ours. And it likely started in Africa somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 years ago, when someone first picked up a piece of ochre, marked their own skin, and felt something shift about how they saw themselves in relation to everyone around them. Even if warmth wasn't the original reason for clothing, it became a matter of survival fast. Between roughly 120,000 and 70,000 years ago, Earth went through a series of brutal glacial cycles. Temperatures dropped sharply, ice sheets expanded, large parts of Africa turned hyper-arid, lakes dried up, and food sources collapsed. The human population may have crashed to somewhere between 10 and 30,000 individuals at its lowest point, genuinely close to extinction as a species. For those who survived, and especially for groups that eventually pushed into Europe and Central Asia, clothing stopped being a social signal and became the line between life and death. A properly constructed garment traps warm air against the body and protects the areas where heat escapes fastest: wrists, neck, extremities. It lets a human body survive conditions that would kill an unclothed person within hours. The groups with fitted, layered, stitched clothing had a survival advantage that's genuinely hard to overstate. They had children. Those children learned the same skills. And that knowledge, carried forward across generations, is part of why modern humans eventually reached every continent on Earth. There's a quieter transition in this story: the shift from animal hide to woven plant fiber. Hides are warm and durable, but heavy, stiff, and require killing an animal to obtain. At some point, humans began spinning plant fibers into thread, then cord, then eventually fabric. The oldest known twisted plant fiber was found in a cave in the country of Georgia, dating back roughly 30,000 years. And crucially, those fibers were already dyed in multiple colors, decorative and intentional from the very beginning. By the time of the Neolithic agricultural revolution, roughly 10,000 BCE onward, textile production had become a core technology of civilization. Flax for linen, wool from domesticated sheep, eventually cotton and silk. And with textiles came something genuinely new: the wardrobe. Clothing specialized by purpose. Heavy cloaks for winter, light wraps for summer, specific garments for ritual, for status, for mourning. Long before the Industrial Revolution mechanized it, textile production was already one of the most significant economic forces in the ancient world. Trade routes were built around it. Empires were financed by it. Silk alone reshaped the political map of half the planet, all traced back to a cold, hairless primate with clever hands and a sliver of bone. So why did ancient humans start wearing clothes? The honest answer is layered. Practical protection first, social signaling almost immediately after, survival necessity when the climate turned hostile, and eventually an entire language of identity as human culture grew more complex. Given who we are, social, symbolic, status-driven, and cold half the time, it was probably inevitable. Whatever you're wearing right now reflects choices, conscious or not, about who you are and how you want to be seen. 150,000 years of history, and what connects you directly to that person on the savannah wrapped in ochre-stained hide is the simple fact that you got dressed this morning.